into the idea of the earth having chakras, and I think a lot of people kind of agree with him on this.
Mm-hmm.
It stemmed originally from the work of Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst again, who discovered the two great energy lines weaving around the St Michael axis that goes across southern Britain, that from East Anglia all the way to Cornwall, and it's the longest part of southern England you can actually have, and there's a straight line alignment that goes along them. They found these two great energy lines weaving in and out of them, and suggested, even in their early research, that it was these were global currents of energy, and they even discovered them continuing up in St Petersburg in Russia. So this was then sort of, furthered really by Robert Kuhn, and he believed there was a great energy current that extended all around the planet and met back up with the St Michael line again. But then he also said there was another one, which he called the plume serpent. The first one was called the rainbow serpent, because it went through Ayers Rock or Uluru in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was the plume serpent. The reason it was called that is because it went through Lake Titicaca, Palenque, etc., and Mount Shasta, and so forth. And there's in the Americas, there's legends of Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha, the plume serpents, who wore these feathered robes and so forth. And when you look at it, on a globe, it's like two kind of great Earth circles, really. They're not perfect circles. They kind of weave around a little bit, like energy does.
Mm.
But they sort of encompass all these amazing sacred sites. Recently, a guy in Glastonbury, a friend of mine called Tor Webster, he's been researching this thoroughly. You can check out his website at rainbowserpent.co.uk, and we kind of keep in touch, and we kind of follow each other's research. But one thing that interested me is that both these major energy currents, which looks like there's sort of two little energy currents going around each one, but they all meet they cross rather in Lake Titicaca in Peru on the island of the Sun.
Yes.
So I had an opportunity to go there last year and to find out if this was the case. And obviously Peru is a major megalithic area. It's amazing.
Yeah.
The sheer magnitude and the stories of the megalithic societies way back in that part of the world. And on the island of the Sun in Lake Titicaca, I discovered some megaliths on there, and it was right where this major energy line went through, and I sort of doused it, and I kind of, I've been sort of trained in geomancy, so forth. It needs to be tested, I think, a bit more scientifically as well, perhaps. But I found the Michael line going through it, and that sort of the extension of the Michael line, or the rainbow serpent going through it, and found where it did actually cross on the island. So, what Robert Kuhn originally visioned out back in the sort of late 80s and early 90s, is I've helped verify through, going there and finding them. And there's lots of links with these energies with fertility as well. And I mean, as you saw on the lecture that I did on that DVD, the energy line goes through this great frog, massive great frog effigy, which Incas revere as a fertility symbol. So again, we find these relations with earth energies and fertility, which is a whole other area of research we can have a look at a little bit later on, perhaps.
Yes, definitely. And you mentioned Avebury, of course. What are some, other of your, I guess, favorite sites? This thing with Lake Titicaca is fascinating, I think. But you talked about, for instance, Wormwood Hill in England, right?
Yeah, that's actually Wandlebury. That's just near my hometown of Cambridge, where I was born and bred. And Wandlebury is like an ancient earthwork. It's like a ring, like a henge. It's like the outer henge of Stonehenge, or the henge of Avebury without the stones, just with a large perfectly circular ditch. And the Mary line, which is one of the two major energy currents that weave around the St Michael line, goes right through that. And also we have an artificial mound, which is built in ancient times, just next to it, called Wormwood Hill. And that's also, another name for that has always been the Dragon's Barrow. And dragon, we know, is related. Some people believe it's related to these earth energy currents, dragon paths, that we get in China and so forth.
Yes.
And that has got some very strange things happening there. There's been lots of people who've had out-of-body experiences and visions there, and it's never been excavated either, which intrigues me, that they then kind of dig in and see what's underneath it. But it looks almost like a sort of conical pyramid. It's quite large as well. Nothing like the sort of magnitude of Silbury Hill. But Wandlebury is, that's another book I'm researching at the moment, actually. And it kind of has global implications, although it's very much about a local area, the whole landscape around Cambridgeshire and Essex. And there's even a grey ley line that goes from Wandlebury all the way down into Essex, which is 26 miles long. and it goes through many different megalithic sites and barrows and stones and hill forts and mounds and so on, and it's all aligned with very precise astronomical events, and which is part of the research that Edmund Marriage is involved in. His auntie and uncle, Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien.
Yes.
Again, what we're seeing with Wandlebury, which the archaeologists, and this is a similar principle in lots of other sites around the world, is that the archaeologists and historians believe it's just maybe a couple of thousand years old. It's like an Iron Age hill fort. But they've not been able to date anything there specifically. They found Neolithic finds there. They found Iron Age finds. So they're kind of being conservative and placing all these sites at a much sort of a more reasonable date than they actually are. And just when you look at the astronomy of the site and the way it was used as an astronomical observatory, you can date it back quite accurately, and this is what the O'Briens did. And again, we're looking at the same period as Stonehenge and Avebury, way over in Cambridgeshire. So again, through researchers like myself and people like Robin Heath and lots of other people I'm involved with, there's a group called the Antiquarian Society, the Stuart Mason and so forth down in Sussex, we're really re-establishing the antiquity and sort of importance of these ancient sites, which are often overlooked just as some bizarre Iron Age hill fort. So this principle of research needs to be addressed all around the planet, I think, to put some of these sites back on the map into their original context.
Yes, indeed. What I'm thinking of also here is when you mentioned a little bit some of the experiences that some people have on these sites out of body. They see orbs or lights even. Some even have what could be termed as UFO sightings, meaning basically unidentified flying object or whatever. And could it be that this in some way also is so it's affecting the human brain very much? And I'm not trying to kind of discredit the experiences people have, rather kind of emphasize it that there really is something going on there, but it could be something internal or a relationship with the site itself, but that it could actually energetically affect a human being who walk into this field of energy.
Absolutely. I mean, there's another aspect of that is modern versions of crop circles, which I'll talk about in a moment. But one of the things that's been discovered at these sites, as many of these, not necessarily all of them, is that the earth energies there are very prominent, and it's only really been taken seriously in the last sort of decade, really. The idea that these earth energies were manipulated and harnessed by the ancients for an unknown purpose. And one of so this has been really kind of put back in the framework as a proper sort of study by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst with their research on the St Michael line and the energies associated with that. And there is evidence that people do have these very strange sort of phenomenon happening to them. And one of the things that's been discovered by John Burke and the BLT research team in America is that it's often where there's what's called a conductivity discontinuity. This is where one piece of geology under the ground sort of changes into another one and flips back and forth. And there's a weird kind of change in geology, basically. And what happens is these telluric lines, or these earth energy lines that are formed by the magnetic field of the planet, they kind of drop, that they kind of have electrical charge, hence the name telluric, generally going through them, but or they're magnetic. It just depends on the geology they're moving through. It's quite a complicated study, this, and I've had to do a lot of reading on this to try and work this out. But generally, where there's this conductivity discontinuity, there's this drop in magnetism of the lines, and this creates electrical charge, and this electrical charge is seen as balls of light or orbs, and this has been noted at many sacred sites, especially they find in the mornings when the sun's rising and the magnetic field changes and forms into these lines, but also at dusk, and even at other times there's strange magnetic anomalies happening at certain sites. And it's not really a kind of a simple theory you can put on all of the sites. There seems to be a lot of interesting different things going on, but again it's related to this magnetism. And one of the things they found with these energies, when there's this drop in magnetism and there's high electrical charge, it affects consciousness.
Yeah. And
for example, in North America there's lots of vision quest areas and sites which are still revered as sacred by the native tribes there to this day. And they've held on to them, a lot of them, which is very good. And the same thing's happening there from a scientific perspective. There's a conductivity discontinuity where the magnetic energies drop. there's this electrical charge. People have these amazing experiences, and this is the same as Wormwood Hill. So I think this is one aspect of it. This is one aspect of how the ancients worked with these energies it's kind of like a shamanic perspective, really. But there's also much more practical purposes as well, such as working with these energies to enhance seeds and fertility and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because what I hear a little bit you're describing there, basically, is a form of plasma, if you will, and I mean, some people even have theorized that energy in itself actually can contain consciousness, meaning that a site like this that have the property of when the magnetics drop, energy flood in, so to speak, and that could actually fill this void right there with some kind of other consciousness. But what I find interesting as well is if you look at some of the Neolithic artwork, is that often depicted are these kind of spirals or orbs and whatnot that very much look like basically like a depiction of some of these phenomena that we've been talking about here.
Absolutely. I mean, these spirals you get these all over the world. You get double spiral symbolism, triple spiral symbolism, and so forth, which is being carved on many ancient sites, literally all around the planet. Again, we see with the dolmens and the pyramids, there's a global kind of understanding. And so what these represent is still really a mystery. But one idea is that they do represent the telluric lines of force, which kind of move within sacred sites. One of the things I've discovered, is that when I go to a site, I kind of go there, quite open-minded with a dowsing rod in hand, just to see where these telluric lines move. And what they seem to do is they bounce off the walls. If there's a chamber there, if there's a stone circle, they bounce from one stone to another.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow the stones are placed to sort of control the energy and keep it within a certain site. And often they turn into spirals. I think naturally they want to go into spirals, these telluric lines. And perhaps this was being noted and recorded by the ancients. And it's just one idea. I'm not sure if that's, I'm not saying that's it, but
sure,
one idea, because I've found this at lots and lots of different sites, and other researchers have said the same. So there could be something there.
Fascinating. And before we break here in a little while, in about 5 or so minutes, for the next segment in our member section, I do want to talk a little bit more about your book, of course, called Earth Grids: The Secret Pattern of Gaia's Sacred Sites. Tell us a little bit more about some of the material that you discuss or write about in your new book.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, initially it's like a sort of history of Earth Grid research, and the idea, there's lots of, if you start looking at the myths, legends, creation stories, we find evidence that they seem to have an idea of how the Earth was formed, was linked with a kind of grid-like crystalline structure. And this is what the Hopi creation myth even speaks about this, or one of the Hopi creation myths anyway, which you can find anywhere on the internet. It's also a big thing about it in the book. And also when we look back at the Book of Enoch, they talk about great surveys of the planet, and that's kind of, again, possibly Neolithic era again. So we look at kind of we go way back and looking at this kind of stuff, and then we bring it up to the modern sort of day from the 60s onwards. We look at the work of Bruce Cathy and how he discovered grid systems over New Zealand, which bizarrely was linked with UFO flight paths and sightings. And
really?
He plotted the grid from that entirely and came up with this grand idea of a global grid, which still a lot of people still stand by to this day, which has got a lot of validity. In the 70s, we had Ivan Sanderson, who came up with the viral vortices, the icosahedral grid theory. Same time that was happening, we had the 3 Russian researchers. I'm not even going to try to say their names on the radio, who came up with similar principles to Sanderson, but they worked with the dodecahedron, which is a 10-sided platonic solid, and they linked that, and then they placed an icosahedron over that, and found that when they aligned the edge of the dodecahedron to the mid-Atlantic ridge, which weirdly it kind of almost clicks into place. Suddenly everything fell into place using the geographic North Poles as the poles, obviously. So the Russians were doing that throughout the 70s, and it was quite a big deal actually at the time in Russia. It got published in loads of scientific magazines. This was taken up by William Becker and Beth Hargens,